Welcome back, parents, educators, and other caring adults in our neurodivergent kids' lives. I have Jeff Copper back on the podcast with me, someone I consider a leading expert in ADHD and also a friend. And we just have the most amazing conversations about really getting deep into the meat of ADHD and neurodivergence and what is going on for our kids. And I'm just excited, as always, to chat with you about new ideas, Jeff. But will you start by letting everybody know who you are and what you do?
Well, that's what I'm here today to do. And I want to reframe this with a new way of looking at motivation. So I'm going to give a little bit of, okay, blah, 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 blah for some of it just to validate it, but we'll try to keep it nice and simple. When you think about it, motivation is this internal force that determines what you do and don't do. Like at its most basic level, I like to keep it just that basic. Now, I'm glad you're having me on here because the topic of motivation is quite emotional, right? A lot of times people look at people with ADHD and say that person's not motivated. That is actually an emotional observation. It's not an objective observation. If somebody's just sitting on the couch not doing their homework, it's not that they're motivated, it's they're motivated to sit on the couch. That's what it is. That's a subtlety, but why is that important? Well, if somebody's motivated to sit on the couch and you're saying you're not motivated, all you're doing is shaming the individual. You're not really helping them. But if you go, they're more motivated to sit on the couch than they are to do that, now you go, oh, there's a problem. What do I do in the environment to shift things so that they would naturally do what might be good for them? So it changes our approach in trying to solve the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And it's hard to let go of some of those ideas that we have been ingrained in us
Yes.
as parents or educators. And so it's really important that we're talking about what motivation really, what drives it? Where does it come from? Why is it a struggle? Versus I'm just going to find any way to motivate my kid, whatever it takes.
Absolutely.
Because that doesn't work, right?
Yep.
That's what we're seeing. That's why we're talking about it, because that doesn't work.
So I'd like to, today, I need to get into a little bit of weeds because I would like to kind of frame out a new way of viewing motivation, particularly in the context of people with executive function impairment, so that we can make like logical sense of this and then come back to the emotion. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm a big fan of Dr. Russell Barkley's executive functioning construct, and I've done a lot of working with it. And, Penny and you and I have talked about it. But he talks about the brain being a two-level system. You have an automatic brain, which is more primitive, and you have the executive functioning brain, which is very effortful because it takes a lot of energy for the executive functioning brain to override the automatic. It's almost like when you're going back for seconds and you're really hungry, like you shouldn't eat it, but you do it anyway. There's like fight that's going on there. So what I've done is changed motivation as we look at it as a two-force system. You have the automatic brain or the primitive brain's motivation, and you have the executive functioning brain motivation. So when we split it into two competing forces, that's what we have. We have two forces that are actually competing for dominance to see what wins. That brings in some interesting things. So if we begin to look at the automatic brain, its motivation is emotional. It's based off of your urges, your desire to seek pleasure, or your desire to escape comfort. It's actually a survival mechanism. Like we forage for food for pleasure because we need nourishment. We come in from the hot and cold because it's uncomfortable. Again, I don't want to minimize it, but our primitive brain is driven by our emotional urges to survive. Our executive functioning brain is driven by the emotional desire for achievement, right? Our emotional desire for achievement, right? But let's talk about this. The executive functioning brain is effortful, right? When it wants to achieve something, there's a level of discomfort that is present for this to happen. So to bring this in a tangible way, that I hope people can identify with. I use my personal experience. I was a competitive swimmer. I was internationally ranked at one time in the 80s. When I'm standing over water's edge, right, it's uncomfortable often because the pool temperature is 79 degrees. It's cold. When I dive in, I'm going to get a shock that I'm not going to like. It's not going to be pleasant. So a lot of times I'm sitting there, come on, Jeff, go. And I think a lot of people can maybe think about being around the pool where like, okay, maybe some other people, you're going to push them in or kind of whatever. Again, what I'm really highlighting is there's a level of discomfort that you have to endure, or I had to endure, to dive in and swim every day. Does it make sense so far?
Yep, totally.
So interesting, because we look at people with ADHD and we're quick to judge behavior. They're not doing what I want them to do. They must be unmotivated or lazy, but we're not taking into consideration the impairment. With the way I'm describing it, for people with ADHD, when they do produce, you're like, holy crap, for this illustration, it takes twice the effort. They're really motivated to do that stuff because they're having to make up for that discount. And, you know, Penny, one of the things that I like about you, you advocate so much for parents to trying to get them help and accommodations, which I'm going to talk about in a second, that when we begin to reframe ADHD this way and we recognize it, it's an invisible, intangible impairment.
Yep.
We talk about it, but because we don't see it, we act like it's not there. Yet the way I'm describing it now, we now have a way of looking at it as a means to understand that difference. So I want to kind of pause and give you an opportunity to clarify or ask any questions.
Yeah, no, it explains so much. And one thing that I've really struggled with my own kid, and I know so many other parents do as well, is avoiding discomfort or perceived potential discomfort. And now that makes more sense from a science perspective, from a
Yes.
biology perspective, that of course you're doing that because you have to put in more. There's more discomfort than your peers sitting next to you. You're facing a more difficult challenge, which we know, but unpacking it this way, I think really drives it much closer home.
100%. 100%.
Makes it much more tangible, as you were saying. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was just talking to somebody else about this being invisible. This is an invisible disability, basically. And it complicates being able to get the accommodations and things like that that we're going to talk about as well.
Absolutely. So I like to use this as a metaphor. You know, I'm looking at you and you have glasses on. Imagine if I made you try to read without them.
Wouldn't happen.
Wouldn't happen. Why? Because it's just too hard. I mean, you might kind of bring the book up and kind of like, I mean, there's all kinds of things that you do, but it take a lot of effort. My point really is if I turn it to a physical disability, it makes all the sense in the world, but because it's cognitive, we can't see it. We tend to act like it's not there. So the idea here really, it's one thing for me to say that, but anybody listening to this is still like, okay, we've got people out there that we're trying to help because we'd like them to be able to run their lives together. And so what do? Well, that's why I'm framing this out, because when you look at it this way, we take an engineering approach, and I've derived a new field of engineering called cognitive ergonomics from the inside out about adapting tasks to the person. It's derived off this. We don't have to get a lot of detail of it, but when we go at this dilemma from an engineering mindset, what we've got to do is we've got to do something to bring these two forces back into equilibrium. So what can we do? Let's talk about that and the practicality of it. One is willpower, but let's think about that. What you're doing is saying, I've got to expend a lot of emotional effort to override my emotional urge to discourage. What I'm doing is I'm amping up my emotions. I'm not bringing equilibrium together. I'm actually making it actually worse. That doesn't logically make a lot of sense. So we take that off the table. Next is rewards. Providing a reward. And I'm going to argue that it will help, but it will be limited. And I'm going to tell this as a story. I was in DC several months ago, working with some lobbyists that Penny and I both know. And I was actually at the nation's capital, and I was imagining there's lots of steps going up the Capitol, and I was imagining somebody at the bottom of the steps without any legs or a wheelchair or a ramp. And I began to imagine I might provide a reward because to get them to crawl up all the steps of the Capitol, but they're having to do it like literally on the ground. And it's difficult. I might provide a reward to get to the first step, and then the second step, and then the third step. And I keep providing rewards to try to get them up to the top, and they get there. Now they're there. Wow, that was a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. To do it again is going to require more reward, because really all I'm doing is I'm providing a reward to amplify the emotion to endure the discomfort. So when you think about it, rewards have limitations because they you have to keep upping the rewards to get the same stuff, and they're not really bringing equilibrium back to these two forces. So it begins to explain why there's limitations in the reward system. So now what's our alternative? Accommodations would be next. Well, there are accommodations for ADHD, but I've got a bone to pick with them. And I'm going to pick on extra time, right? Not all of them are extra time, but I like this one because it is commonplace, whether it's extra time on a test or extra time to do a thing. Effectively, Penny, all we're doing is allowing people a longer time to suffer. We're not relieving the impairment.
Thank you for saying it.
We're just having you suffer longer. So let's think about this. Let's say you gave a person with ADHD extra time at work. You can do 8 hours of work over 10 hours. Well, you're just giving longer time to suffer, so you work longer. So you go from chronic emotional pain to chronic stressed out. In other words, this is what burnout is, because you're not able to recover. Again, we're not really providing adaptive accommodations. We're not really relieving the impairment. We're just asking them to suffer. So that doesn't really bring the balance to the impairment. Our alternative is what I call adaptive accommodations. This is where we're trying to provide, and this is a big word, what I call systemic relief. So Penny, when your eyes are impaired and you're trying to read, I could give you extra time to read. I don't think that's going to help any. But if we give you glasses, it's mitigating or eliminating the impairment. It's providing relief, and you're able to function. So one of the things that I'm trying to get this out, the whole new notion out there, is to change the narrative that we need to look at adaptive accommodations. And you and I, there's another podcast that you and I had talked about, that how direct oral conversations were derived originally. Language was actually derived originally to solve shared problems. And many times people with ADHD, they just need to be able to talk through stuff. To declutter something is a lot easier if they're talking with somebody like, where do I put this thing? So we're making a case for providing these adaptive accommodations to relieve the impairment so people with ADHD don't have to suffer. But what we're doing is, ADHD is an executive functioning impairment, which is intangible. Having a direct oral conversation is intangible. We're trying to equate the two to justify why that's a legitimate accommodations, which, while I'm on my horse, Penny, we have problems in any facet of our life, whether it's personal or school or work or psychological. Have you ever thought about, when you have a problem, what's the go-to at school? You go talk to the teacher, you go talk to a tutor, parents help you with homework. At work, you go to a boss, a coworker. In the psychological world, you go talk to a therapist or a coach. My point really is direct oral conversations is an adaptive accommodation for people with ADHD, yet we don't recognize it. But the reason I'm so grateful you're bringing me on the program is, if we take a look at this new model as a 2-4 system, and we acknowledge that ADHD is an executive function impairment, we now begin to look at what used to look like unmotivated or lazy. We begin to understand the plight. Then when we see that they do something, we recognize it probably took them more to get there. Now we have a greater level of respect for the individual. So let's quit shaming everybody by saying they're lazy and unmotivated. Let's look at how they're motivated, because when we do that, the answers that we find and how we help them completely change.
I'm so thankful that you said that we are just prolonging the struggle, because this has been my argument for years. When we give kids more time, because they have slower processing speed, because they have executive function impairment, whatever it is, all we're doing is punishing them to do the same work in the same way. We're just prolonging the suffering, as you said. And we don't get it because we get so focused on fairness and how it has to be equal time and equal amount of work. And so I am just so thankful this conversation where we're actually comparing compensatory with adaptive.
Yes.
Because then we can start seeing this in a different way that isn't going to prolong the suffering.
Absolutely.
So I'm hoping that we're going to talk about like what would adaptive accommodations look like? What are some examples of those so that parents know where they can take this information and put it in real life?
So there's a few things that I'm going to, some of this is I can cueing, direct oral conversation, and toggling are issues. Those are what's cueing. Like, I'm going to try to get into this a little bit because this is intangible stuff if you're not used to it. So bear with me. A lot of times, Penny, we retrieve knowledge by cues. People with ADHD, like a lot of browser tabs are open because if they close it, they'll forget about it. In other words, you have a reminder out, there's a cue. And so as a accommodation is if I sat down with you in the morning and I said, Penny, what do you got to do today? What could get in your way? What do you need in order to get things done for today? How much time is it going to take you to do this task? Right? Those are what I call cueing questions. I'm asking you to think. You would think that Penny would do it in the morning, neurotypicals would do it, but people with ADHD, because it's cognitively difficult, it's harder. But when I ask the questions and she starts to respond to me, I'm actually helping her retrieve the knowledge that she has and to begin to think about her day. That is actually a intangible accommodation. And I'm sure with your kids and other people, sometimes you sit down and say, what happened in school today? What is this paper got to be about? You don't necessarily know it, but you're actually getting them engaged in the thinking. You're not solving the problem, but that's one. Sitting down with somebody and saying, hey, tell me what you're going to do or tell me what you want to write about. We talk about verbal processors in our world. For many people with ADHD, not to talk is not to think. All you have to do is engage. Let them explain it to you. They'll solve their own problem often. There's another real big challenge in our world today with what I call toggling, and this is really difficult for me to describe, but when I was use my college. When I was in college, I would buy used books because that somebody else highlighted, and I would just read the highlight. Imagine I'm reading a text and the target, I see some stuff in yellow that's important, and I have some notes from class that are important. When I put it in front of me, I don't have to read a bunch of extra words. I just read what's highlighted, and my eyes dart over, and they look at my notes. And I'm able to recognize it. This is really, I have an impaired ability to hold things in my working memory, but it's not that bad. In our world today, you look at something on a screen, you can't really highlight it. So you have to read a whole bunch of extra words to find what you're looking for. Then you've got to think, oh, I got to click on this tab, or I got to scroll. All these other instructions are coming between the part of time you identified what you're reading and where you're going to. And by the time you get to where you want to go, you can't remember what you read to begin with. And so one of the things that I'm really struggling with, I wouldn't want to be a student today. There's no printers. Like I did an interview with Dr. Russell Barkley back in 2018. We talked about how paper is high tech for people with ADHD. Because if you print it out, I can see it. And a lot of schools, it's convenient for them to put this stuff online. But if you have an executive function impairment and you have limited capacity, you've already got a stressed executive function and you're exacerbating, you're actually making it worse. But people don't think in those terms. We've got to provide those printers as an adaptive accommodation, right? For these people to do it, or at least give them multiple screens. Nobody's advocating for that today. Why? Because it's convenient for the system to go digital. They're looking at their convenience. They're not necessarily recognizing these impairments. Again, providing a printer is to fit the job, the task to the individual, not the individual have to figure out how they're going to hold this in working memory. Again, we're reversing it. It's no longer about the person changing their behavior, but getting something to fit. You know, there's that Blind Side is a movie about Michael Orr, and there's a part of that movie where they're talking they're realizing the teachers, this guy knows what he has, but if you ask him the question, he can explain it to you, but he has a hard time getting on paper. Why is that? Because there's a bottleneck between all these ideas, and funneling through that to get it all written down, they start forgetting stuff. He was intelligent, but we had to make those adjustments. So many of these adaptive accommodations are a bit intangible, I acknowledge, and they look like help because there's somebody there that's guiding you with assistance. But they're there if you look at them, and it's just really just a matter of tuning in. And if anybody's interested, I can send stuff to them. But really, if we begin to look at this, and you look out into the world, people with ADHD really function pretty well when they're collaborating, working with other people, and because they're helping them with their executive functions. And at the end of the day, we just got to change the way we look at it, and we can really make a difference.
And these are things that parents can ask for school, these types of accommodations. My kid needs this work on paper, not on their computer.
Yep.
Or, my kid needs to talk out the assignment with you before they get started. It does add more time and effort on the teacher's part, but I always feel like these sorts of things actually save time on the back end.
Well, let's talk about that.
Because the struggle also takes time.
Let's talk about this. In the world of physical disabilities, we got wheelchair ramps, we've got Braille, we got signers. We have all kinds of accommodations for the tangible world. In the intangible world, we're talking about direct oral conversations, which often are built in. I remember, Penny, when the pandemic hit and lockdown hit, I thought I was going to be out of job in 60 days because I'm expensive and people were struggling. No, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Adults were calling me, I'm unproductive, I lack motivation. I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with that. You were in an environment that had direct oral conversation. It's no longer there. You're having to do this in mind. You haven't changed. It was providing the environment. You just didn't know it. And Andy Rogers at Attitude Magazine once said, ADHD is amplified or muted based off of the environment. This would begin to explain it. And so it's already kind of there, but it's not there. It's not condoned. And so whether it's a student that might need just like to be able to talk out loud, or an adult that needs somebody to say, hey, what are you doing with? Look, can I help you think through the problem? Where you can say, I need somebody to come in. Like I said, it's already there and it's already taken place to a certain level. Even on the neurotypical level, it's just because of the impairment. People with ADHD just need more, and they need the ability. And right now you might have to fight it, but that's why I've always loved you. You've always let me come on to your podcast and talk about things that are out there. And this one is really near and dear to my heart because we've got to change the way people look at it so that these things are provided to the kids and you don't have to fight for them. And
Yes.
You're in advocacy and I'm in advocacy. We're fighting that stuff. So we're both people on the same charge. And I'm a fan of yours because it's really about helping parents do this and trying to get the rest of the public that looks at behavior and infers what's going on in the brain, like the person's lazy. No, there's an impairment. By the way, you can take tests, cognitive tests that show that there's an impairment, whether there's a diagnosis or not. And my program, Cognitive Ergonomics from the Inside Out, it's not ADHD ergonomics. These concepts apply to anybody with an executive function impairment. Anybody.
Yeah. And, you were reminding me, talking about advocacy, my solo cast on the podcast that published today, actually, as we're recording this, is about how we need to provide dignity and humanity to neurodivergent students because we're robbing them of that when we don't give them the appropriate accommodation, the adaptive accommodation. We're robbing them of dignity and humanity, and it is traumatizing. My kid is 23 and still doesn't believe that he could do any higher education or take any classes, that he would not succeed at them. He has a high IQ. He's twice exceptional. He's brilliant. And yet we are still trying to undo all of the damage done in our traditional education system by not looking at it as an impairment and making adaptations instead of trying to give more time and put on more pressure and ask for more motivation, right? And so this is a soapbox issue for me as well, because
if I may, I'd like to share
we're harming kids.
I'd like to share my personal story on this. I have ADHD, but I have dyslexia, which is really one of the bigger issues. And when I was in high school, I couldn't handle chemistry or English, much better, much less Spanish. So I didn't even take college prep. I was just getting a degree to get out. I was fortunate enough to be an athlete and to get on a swimming scholarship. And when I got to school, I had unlimited tutors. I think the second semester of my sophomore year, I had the highest tutoring bill at Indiana University. And so because I adapted and I worked with tutors, I had the direct oral conversation. My English teachers are rolling over in the grade to think that I got my MBA. Not only did I get it, but I didn't do a paper in my first class because I never dreamed I'd get 4.0, but I would have gotten a 4.0. What's the point? Comparing and contrasting where I am, I never thought I would be able to get a graduate degree, much less be successful, with some people that don't. The difference was I had the adaptive accommodations and I didn't have a problem emotionally going to ask for help. That can be the difference. And I'm not going to say that I'm bright, but I think I brought a few things into this world that's kind of worthwhile. And there's a lot of untapped talent. I don't personally feel that ADHD is a gift. It's not something you would wrap up and give to somebody present. However, people have gifts. And the issue is ADD gets in the way. So we could provide those accommodations so it doesn't get in the way. Their natural gifts can come forward. And there's so many people with ADHD that have contributed a lot to our world, which goes back to your point. Why are we so cruel and inhumane by making these suffer only because we can't actually see the impairment? It really comes down to that. Like, just because you can't see $1 million doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
You can't see it and you don't understand it.
Yep.
And that's where, teachers have the best of intentions and they like kids. They want kids to do well. They wouldn't be a teacher. They just don't get this information. They're not taught about learning.
You make a good point. They're
ADHD.
well-intended people, but they're not, this isn't common vernacular. They're not taught to think of it this way. They're not given the support to do what they need to do. So I'm glad you brought this up. This is not a knock on them. If they knew the answer, but the cool part, Penny, is you're letting me come on, and people can judge this on their own merit, but the logic of this makes so much sense to me that I'm hoping that parents will get this and think about this, watch this a couple times, go talk to other people about it. From this vernacular, I think you'll have a really difficult time arguing against it. If somebody is going to argue it, it's because they don't want to be confused with the facts because their mind is already made up and you're not going to get them. But the people that are on fence go, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. And we can change the world slowly that way.
Yes. Yes. Jeff, tell everybody where they can learn more about this and your work online.
My website is digcoaching.com. That's like D-I-G, like dig a hole, coaching.com. We're talking about this new theory of motivation. It was derived by cognitive ergonomics on the inside out. On my page, if you click on services, I do have a program on this. If you have a teacher that you know or other people that you think could be beneficial of that, as a parent, if you're interested, you could take the class, not required. It can be very helpful to understand ADHD at a deeper level, but I am trying to get to HR specialists, disability specialists, teachers, therapists, and coaches, because this new lens changes and reframes how we're looking at things so that they can be a little bit more effective. And so I'm just saying that is because I'm trying to change the world with regard to that. And again, if I can get to the professionals that help people with ADHD, we can really make an impact. So again, it's digcoaching.com.
Absolutely. And I will link that up in the show notes for everyone at parentingadhdandautism.com. Jeff, always a pleasure. I always learn so much. I get inspired. I feel hopeful after this conversation, so many things, and I really appreciate it.
Penny, you truly are a thought leader. Like, so much of what you do is just help people out there that are in need. There's a lot of other people in this space that are really more concerned about the dollar, but you really care about everybody. And I just have to give it back to you. You're such a resource for everybody. Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you for noticing and saying that. Always a pleasure. Well, I will end here and I will see everybody next time. Take good care.